this session. I know a few people can make it today, like Willie Levinson, for instance, maybe following up with him later. So we're going to start with a few pictures and some video, which is kind of exciting. So Josie, I embedded these in. So we're going to start with this. So there's the in water sediment coring. So this is a, Josie, if you want, this is a, well, I'm going to go ahead and share the videos first, so that's okay. So this is just a picture, obviously, of the vessel that was doing the coring. But I embedded a couple of videos in here that hopefully will play. Let me know in the chat if you cannot hear them. Let me go to the next one. So this is, Josie, do you want to explain what this is before I press play?
Yeah, sure. So this is what you're looking at. That vertical tube is the core that is going to get driven down into the sediment and fill up with sediment. And that round cap on it is the vibrating. It's like a weighted vibrating thing. And so it hangs by gravity off the front, that front arm of the boat kind of swings down and it hangs there, and then it vibrates the core down into the sediment. And that you can see the cables running off the top. That's just to provide the power to the device. And then it also has a tape measure taped to it, like, or zip tied to it, so that we can see how far down it's going.
There we go. Whoops, you don't have to watch it twice, but there you go. That's one. And then
how far did it go? How far down?
We're aiming to get 15 feet down with these cores. And when we talk about, like, if we hit refusal, it meant that we weren't able to get down that full 15 feet. And so then they'll move like 20 feet over and try again. And they try that up to 3 times for a given sample point. And then at the end of those 3 attempts, they take the best option that they have.
Okay, thanks.
Good question, Laura. And this is the processing. So once they have the core, Josie, I don't know if you say, I'm gonna let Hunter explain. Josie recorded him. We'll see if it works. Talking about how the core is processed once they get it. So I'm gonna go ahead and share it. Is that okay, Josie?
Yeah.
Here we are in the processing area. We've just pulled a 15-foot core off the boat, and we're currently cutting it up into 1-foot sections and putting those into jars to take it to the laboratory for analysis.
So that's what that is.
And so one thing that Hunter kind of glossed over in that clip is that, so they mark off, they cut the core open so you can see the 2 parallel tracks there on the table. And then they mark it out in 1-foot intervals, and then they scoop the material out of that 1-foot interval and mix it thoroughly in a clean metal bowl, so that we really do a good job of homogenizing everything that's within that 1-foot interval. And then they put that material into the sample jars.
Thanks, Josie. I think, do we have one other? Oh, nope, that's it. So Josie, do you want to kind of, I'll stop sharing for a second, and then Josie can update you kind of just how the in-water sediment coring went?
Yeah, I'd say in general, it went very well. We did hit some areas of this really dense black sand. It's not the black sandblast grit stuff, but like a more down at around like 8 or 9 feet in certain areas that our fiber cores just couldn't get through. And so we didn't get the full 15 feet everywhere, unfortunately. And then there were a couple places that, because the water was so shallow, as you guys know, we just couldn't get the boats in. And so we ended up going back and taking those last week from the surface. So those ended up being slightly shorter samples as well. But other than that, it was quite successful. We're really pleased with how much of the targeted cores we were able to get.
So we have plenty of time for questions, but that was the in-water core sediment core sampling. That was the first piece. Now we're going to transition to what a lot of you saw. I know Laura went, Alex went, Sarah
Doug was
Taylor,
there.
did you? Yeah, Doug went. Doug and Jade. Jessica Terlikowski was there, I know. Anyone Lauren went by. Anyone else I'm missing? Went to go see the.
Yeah, the guy who was the first chair of the Portland Harbor KEG, I'm forgetting his name.
Oh, Robin Plants.
Yes, Robin. was
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was neat,
yeah.
that was neat.
That's awesome. Well, I have a little treat for all of you since you're so hardcore in being on this working group meeting, and that is so Caleb's boss took a time-lapse video of the beach sampling. That's kind of cool. She took a couple, but this one I want to share with you. So hold on one second, and then Josie can give some updates on how the beach sampling went too. So one second. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and do, this is a time-lapse video. Here we go. There's no audio. It's just time. Kind of, if you want to say anything, Josie, about what they're doing.
Oh yeah, you can just see, so we'd already put the pin flags out, and then there's 2 sampling teams working to gather all 50 of those points. And they're working in teams of 2, and unfortunately you can't see the flags very well in this video, but they're going kind of point to point for the plan. And then we stop and consult from time to time.
Yeah. So those of you who were out there saw this too, and I have another one. I mean, they're so short. So I'm going to go ahead and show you. Can you see the other video? It's outside the PowerPoint. Okay, so this one is a separate one, but it shows you that it's more of a recreation vibe. You'll see a little kayaker going to as the sampling's going.
And this is when they were placing those pin flags. So this video clip predates the last one you saw.
Oops.
That's fine.
You can see how people are using the beach, just like all of you, helped us learn. So thank you. And in these clips, just so you know, I mean, we do want to put them on our YouTube channel and link them to the story map ideally too. So I think that's the only, oh wait, this is an ISM sample. This is a closer one too. There's Josie.
It's my business pose there in the back. Yeah, they're gathering, so that's them processing the right amount. They had to get the same amount of material from every borehole. And so that's what you can see Kyle is filling up a measuring cup to make sure that we really got 1/3 of a cup from each location.
Great. I think that's it. So Josie, we can pause again and talk about the beach sampling, which all of you provided so much great insight on. So thank you again for everything.
Yeah, that also went very well. We got all the samples we were hoping to get. Those are, they've been jarred up, they've been sent off to the lab. And so now we're just waiting on the analytical results of those.
I'd just like to say, I think I said this before, but it was a really wonderful day to go down there and watch the work. I mean, it's very simple, but it was very physical. It was connected, and it was wonderful being able to talk to you, Josie, and Hunter, and I can't remember her name already, the boss.
Julie.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a nice day, and we were talking amongst ourselves, and I mean,
it was
we were
wonderful.
Physically in the place, and it was really wonderful. So thank you for that.
I'm with you. That's been my favorite day of the year so far.
So awesome. Yeah, I felt all of the positive energy that was there. So thank you all for working group members who went. I just think it's awesome. And Alex, did you want to talk though about, because I know when Cassie was there, and Jesse, maybe you can talk to this too. There was some kind of like wood mat or something that you found, didn't you, that you had to kind of work around? Or Alex, I know, well, Cassie mentioned, I remember you mentioned that you were there too when this happened, Alex, and you saw them work around it. No? Oh, no. Josie, do you want to talk about it?
I'm recalling that there was that when I was there were some issues with something that I found close to the surface, and they were having to kind of move things around. But I didn't get too many details about it.
Yeah, there was an area close to the pilings down in the decision unit 2, I think, that turned out to be mostly wood chips. And we can't sample wood chips the way that the analytical works. It doesn't do a wood chip sample. So we kind of had to find where the edge of that wood chip mat was. And we determined that that we could move those sample points slightly in order to get sampleable material, and that it wouldn't compromise the edges of our decision unit, because we just didn't have to move them that far.
That's what I'm remembering as well, actually, was that there were some issues just right under the surface with some material there, but that it's just stepping out a little bit from the original sampling locations, but you didn't have to go far enough that it would compromise the data quality, essentially. So
Well said. Yeah, that's what Alex said. And the same thing happened then in decision unit 3, up near the grass. There was a concrete pad that went out further than we expected. But again, so when you first see that, you're like, oh no, how big is this? We don't know how big it's going to be. And then we figured it out that it doesn't. It's small enough, it won't make an impact.
Thanks, Josie and Alex. Then we have the last piece of sampling that we talked about was the riverbank sampling, and late breaking news, one of our working group members told me that they have some special photos that they're willing to share too, but I'll start with the ones that I have that I selected for today. I don't have any video, so but these, Josie, do you want to kind of explain a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this is a hand auger. So there was, in places where we could get a geoprobe down to the tracked rig down to the beach, we used that and got 10-foot cores. And then in places where we couldn't get the tracked vehicle, we needed to collect those cores by hand. And so this guy is just driving a core manually down into the sediment, and they went 3 feet down with the manual cores. And the way that worked out is basically all the sample points downstream from the walkway at Cathedral Park, like in front, all the sample points in front of the BES lab are the ones that we were not able to get a tracked rig out to. So that's where these hand augers happened. And there's the tracked rig. And you can see it's just a much more powerful mechanized device. So it can go a lot further down into the subsurface.
For the geo probing?
Yeah, yep.
I think, do I have another one? Nope. So Alex Lopez is the surprise. Do you want to share your screen, Alex?
sure, let me see if I can do this. And what I have is kind of a fairly lengthy raw video. It's like 6 minutes long. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but it actually kind of goes through the whole process of putting the hollow stem down, pulling it out, and then it actually shows them pull the sample actually out of that. So I'll just go ahead and play it. Let me know if there's any problem.
Sure.
So what you're looking at here is they're actually putting the riser on the auger right now to get the sample from 5 to 10 feet. So there's, you'll see when they pull it out, but there's already the sampling device close to the bottom. And this machine works similarly to the way that the video we saw previously with the sediment sampling. It's the same concept.
Great video.
So they've driven that all the way down. So now they're going to start pulling that out. First thing they're going to pull out is the riser sample. And Laura, let me know if this is taking too long. I can try to fast forward.
I think this is really good. maybe once they've taken it out.
So now they're actually going to be pulling out the hollow stem that's got the acetate liner in there with the sample. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward a little bit. So you can see they've actually taken out that sample. They're mounting that to be able to take the soil sample out. And I'll pause it for a second. You'll notice there's a 55-gallon drum with a pipe sticking out of it. That is actually a previous sample, probably the 0 to 5 foot sample that came out of there. So what he's doing now is actually pulling out a similar tube to that. Forward a little bit as well. So that, what he just pulled out of there is actually sediment core. That's it.
And is that a plastic tube that's inside it?
I think it's an acetate liner. I think is what it is. I'm not a driller, so I believe it's an acetate liner, and that's what they cut when they actually get the sample to the processing. Is they actually cut that acetate liner and then expose the core that's in there.
Awesome. I wasn't able to get down for this, Alex, so this is super cool for me to see.
Yeah.
This one it's got a minute and a half left, so it kind of goes through them just wrapping up the ends of the sample tube and putting in that drum as well. So I can send you all this video if you'd like to take that. I've got a couple of other ones as well, but this one was one of the best ones. So yep.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. This is great. That's awesome. Thank you so much for going and taking that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of that work, oversight work. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a driller, but I've overseen many drill rigs, and I always think it's really nice, particularly when we have so many meetings about kind of process and you know how and setting things up and exchanging ideas. It's really nice to actually see what all of this means in the real world on the ground. So
yes.
That sample that was taken, you know, they got, looks like 10 feet going down right there at the beach. So they were able to actually get samples from 0 to 10 feet. So yeah.
It's so awesome. Thank you. And Josie, do you want to talk a bit about the riverbank sampling and how that went, since I was just last week? Yeah.
Yeah, it went well. We got all the sample points we were hoping to get, and we were able to go back. There were a couple of in-water cores that we weren't able to get because it was too shallow, but they were able to kind of time the tides right and go pull some of those samples. So we did even better than we had expected.
That's great. Does anyone have any general questions? Josie's going to go over the timeline now that we've taken all the samples, but kind of what's going to be coming up, and some of the considerations with the lab analysis piece. But any questions just on the general updates on the sediment coring, beach ISM sampling, which is incremental sampling methodology, Kathy, just so you know, and riverbank sampling.
So those deeper core samples on the beach, my memory is that those weren't included in your original ideas for beach sampling.
We ironically had it flipped around. We had those sample points. We thought that fewer of them were going to be able to be 10-foot cores, and more of them would have to be the 3-foot cores. But then because of the access issues, ones that we thought we'd be able to go deeper with, we weren't. And then because we had extra resources, we were able to turn some that we thought we were gonna have to do is 3 foot into full 10-foot cores.
Thanks.
Great question, Doug. Good memory.
Keeping me honest.
Okay, well, Josie is not going anywhere, so we'll have plenty of more time to ask her questions, but we'll transition now to the updated tentative timeline still. And some of it is not, I do need to update it because this is not estimated. This was done. The beach sampling was done and the riverbank sampling was done. But Josie, you want to take it away about the publishing results piece and the lab analysis piece?
Yeah, so if you guys remember, the lab analysis is going to happen in 2 stages, 2 tiers, as we call it. The tier 1 samples are being run for analysis now, and there's 3 different labs that are working on these samples, and they're going at different paces. And then once we get the data back, it then has to be validated. And then we are going to decide which samples to send off for our tier 2 analysis to kind of get an even more granular understanding of where the contamination is. And so we're starting to see some of that data roll back in now, especially for the Cathedral Park cores, because we took those first. And then we went and did the fun lean cores. So we're starting to see the PAH data come back. We are probably still 3 weeks away from seeing the DAX and Purin data start coming back. So we're expecting that data to cascade in the next few months. And then we'll be able to look at that data and decide which additional samples to send off for sampling. So Laura, if you want to pull up one of the slide that shows the tier 1 and tier 2. Good.
And that's, well, we'll come back to this timeline in a second, but yeah, let's get this first.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna do it my way. So if this shows you, if we were able to take a 15-foot core, that what we took off for tier 1, what we sent off for tier 1 analytical was the 0 to 1 foot interval, the 4 to 5 foot interval, the 9 to 10 foot interval, and the 14 to 15 foot interval. And the rest of those samples, all the other 1 foot intervals, we archived. We have them stored in a freezer at EPA's lab in Manchester. And so we send those off for tier 1 analytical. If they came back and they were all below our remediation thresholds, so there was no RAL exceedances, there's no PTW exceedances, we would say this core represents an area that's below our action levels. Okay. Next slide.
That's where this is the less than right there, right, Josie?
Yeah, exactly. Here's another scenario where we send off tier 1 analytical. Again, we've got 0 to 1 foot, 4 to 5, 9 to 10, and 14 to 15 yet analyzed. Let's say in this case, the 0 to 1 foot interval was above remediation thresholds, but all the rest of them at depth were below remediation thresholds. Yeah. So we're going to assume that the areas between, like the 5 foot to 9 foot interval, are clean. But we need to do a better job of understanding where the contamination ends between 0 to 4 feet. So we would send off those intervals in that middle zone for analytical as part of tier 2. And then that helps us determine where the depth of contamination is in that area.
Which is the DOC.
That's the depth of contamination. And our rule is that it takes two contiguous 1 foot intervals that are below RALs to give us that depth of contamination. All right, I got a couple. Yeah. We'll do and then so the one on the left is an example where we saw contamination in the 0 to 1 foot. We saw contamination above our remediation thresholds in the 4 to 5, and also in the 9 to 10. And in that case, we assume that that whole area is above our remediation thresholds. And so we're trying to delineate in this between where it ends between 10 feet and 14 feet, right? That we expect the extent of contamination to be in that one of those intervals. And so then we would run those samples for tier 2 analysis. So we're gonna know a lot after just understanding what the tier 1 data says. But then there's going to be this second round that's going to get us even better, more granular information about for our design. And when we run those tier 2 samples.
So before I go back to that timeline, are there any questions just about that tier 1, tier 2 concept? Because that's the lab analysis piece of all those cores, and these are for the sediment cores, right, Josie?
Yeah, and we'll do the same thing for the riverbank cores as well.
So this is probably a really silly question, but that's okay. I ask them all the time.
Do it.
There are no silly questions.
So you're examining COCs. Does that include everything? So if you ended up with a sampling of some contaminant that you couldn't identify or whatever, I mean, does it take into consideration everything that comes up? Do you know what I mean? You're not choosing.
I think I do. The way these tests work is there's tests for very specific things. And so like in the sediment cores are being run for, say I'm doing an analytical on for dioxins and furans. When I run that sample through the lab, they only tell me about dioxins and furans. They don't come up with other things.
What about PCBs? Yes, it does. So I'm wondering, well, would PCBs be examined?
Oh yeah. So for our contaminants of concern for sediments, we're doing table 21. So we're doing PCBs, PAHs, pesticides, and dioxins, furans. And then in the riverbank samples, we're doing table 17 as well. So
and that's from the record of decision. Just
yeah.
Clarify.
We're doing the broader, all the contaminants that have cleanup levels, long-term cleanup levels are being tested in the riverbank samples. There's a few that we know from previous data that are not in the area and they're hard to test for. So we're not doing those, like chlorobenzene and naphthalene, I think. Or not naphthalene, chlorobenzene, tributyltin is the other one. But the rest of the CUL contaminants we are looking at.
Okay.
Josie, are y'all running just like 8260 and getting a full list of VOCs out of that? Or are you just targeting the specific VOCs from the list?
No, we're doing 8260. Yeah.
Okay. And what about 8270 for PAHs? Are you doing the full 8270 list or?
Now you're out of I can find out for you by reading the quack for sure.
Okay. And Laura, I was asking Laura Feldman, I was asking those questions because some of the tests that you can run actually do show you kind of it'll be like a full list of like 80 different chemicals, and you can actually see things you might not have expected. But like Josie was saying, a lot of times, the tests are specific for one particular thing.
Yeah, that's a good clarification, Alex, especially the organic compounds, volatile organic compounds. Those tests give you back a real laundry list. And in that case, we are really just looking at the contaminants of concern for our site.
So essentially, you're looking for things you know to look for.
Yep.
If somebody had dumped a barrel of plutonium in there, it wouldn't be flagged.
Nope.
Okay.
We're at the stage in the process, that kind of what should we be looking for question was part of the remedial investigation.
Okay.
And now that we've had this cleanup decision made, and so that really guides what it is that targeted what we're looking for and what we're cleaning up based on.
So what you're looking for isn't completely random.
It's not. It's quite well thought out. Spent 20 years to come up with that list.
And Doug and Laura, a lot of times you create that list by looking at the complete, as far as you can get, the complete history of the site. What has happened on that site? What do you know? What do you suspect might be on that site? So that's a lot of the work that goes into kind of planning before you actually take the samples, but trying to do everything you can to define that list of what you might find so that you can order the appropriate laboratory tests.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Great questions as always. I'm gonna go back really fast just to the timeline, because this tier 1 and tier 2 piece Josie just explained is kind of key. That's why this is still a tentative timeline, because the publishing of the results, and Josie, I'll let you explain more, but because of that tier 1, tier 2 differentiation that Josie just talked about, that will affect the publishing of the results. So Josie, do you want to just talk about that and just also the kind of the other considerations with the labs right now to refresh on that?
Yeah. So we're looking at getting that tier 1, you know, we're starting to see the tier 1 data come back. We think we'll have all the tier 1 data back by mid-December, probably, maybe late December. Some of these labs are also getting hit with all the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing all over the economy. And they're having trouble getting some of the equipment they need to run their samples. So fingers crossed, we'll get our tier 1 data back by the end of this year. Then we'll send out the tier 2 samples that we need run, and that will probably take a few months to get them run and get the data back and get the data validated. And then we'll put it into a pretty bare bones report form. We really prioritized sampling, as you all know, and we did not necessarily prioritize making really pretty pictures with the sample results. And so we're gonna do what we can with the data, but we're probably not gonna have really clear visuals on the data until we get all the data back in, so that we just do it one time. But I do think we're gonna have interesting updates for you well before we have that, the pretty pictures ready to publish.
That leads into the educational activity portion, because probably, I mean, we can continue to discuss this as a working group, but if we want to do an in-person, COVID willing, educational activity where we talk about the sampling results, it might be good to wait until we have more final ones, and that might take a little bit longer, but we're not, the timing's still kind of squishy on that because of what Josie just said. So we can continue to think about when the best timing for that will be to do an in-person educational event with the sampling results. But, we can, that's why this working group, we can provide early updates, obviously, on the information we're getting back. Right, Josie?
Mm-hmm.
So any questions for Josie on any of that before we transition into the educational activities piece? And we can take a 5-minute break too if folks want. But any questions for Josie on anything sampling related at all? Really hard questions for her.
Well, Josie, this is Francisca. Could you briefly speak to the tier 3 on those charts?
Sure. Laura, if you want to pull back up one of those charts. So tier 3 is once we've established the depth of contamination, and now you're going to out me, that these figures actually came out of River Mound 9 West PDI, which is a different project area, but they have better graphics than we have. So we use their same approach. So we are not necessarily planning to do tier 3.
Okay.
We're hoping to hand it off to somebody else and then we'll give them our samples in case they want to run them. But the goal there is if you are putting in a cap, then you need to design it to meet all the table 17 COCs. And so we're doing our in-water, we're delineating our action areas based on a more limited set of contaminants. But when we design the remedy for that area, we want to design it to account for all the contaminants of concern on the site. And so that's why we might want to go back at that point and right where we know the depth of contamination is to run the full suite of analytical there so that we can design a cap or understand what the leaf surface from a dredge prism might be.
Right, that's very helpful. Thank you. I agree, they're great figures.
Right? I know, they did a good job.
Any other questions? Doug?
This is kind of unrelated, but it occurred to me earlier today. My assumption is that the state of Oregon owns the river bottom. So everywhere you're putting a cap is on state of Oregon property rather than offshore from PRPs?
Correct. There's some exceptions to that the port owns some in-water land, but for the most part, it's fair to say that the Department of State Lands owns the in-water, the riverbed.
I was thinking specifically in Willamette Cove where that big existing McCormick and Baxter projects into it south of the railroad bridge.
Yeah, I think that's all DSL land.
Whether Metro owned that land under the cap or it was state, and how you put the new cap to tie in with the old cap. Who would be responsible for all that?
The landowner isn't necessarily responsible for the construction. And so we have yet to figure out that piece of it, of how we're going to do remedial action and who's responsible for taking that action. But if it is not the landowner, then whoever is building the remedy needs to come to a legal agreement with the property owner to provide an easement for that action.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Thanks.
Mhm.
Great question. Great. Let's everyone take a stretch break. 5 minutes. You can stretch. Let's do it. Who wants a 5-minute break? Or do you want to just keep going? No, 5-minute break. Okay, everyone, 5 minutes. We'll come back at 1:05 and talk about some education.